July 13th, 1931, mid-morning, Vienna. A line forms before the doors of the Kreditanstalt. Men in worn coats clutch paper slips. Women keep their eyes on the ground. Inside, clerks whisper, counting the same bills again and again. A manager wipes sweat from his collar. Then, the doors stay shut. No announcement, no explanation. Just silence. Within hours, the truth spreads through cafes and tram stops. The largest bank in Austria has collapsed. Savings are frozen. Credit is gone. Businesses stop paying wages. The city exhales, and something fragile inside it breaks. This is not just a banking failure. It is the moment when faith in institutions, in democracy, in the future, begins to fail across Europe. What changes here will matter directly to the road toward World War II. Because when money vanishes, power does not. It moves. By nightfall, the shock has crossed borders. Berlin watches Vienna and understands the danger. Paris calculates exposure. London debates intervention. And ordinary people everywhere feel the same cold realization: the system cannot protect them. Then, the radio goes silent. Weeks earlier, politicians spoke of recovery, of stability, of patience. Now governments scramble behind closed doors. Emergency meetings replace parliaments. Decisions move faster than laws can follow. This is how financial crisis becomes political weaponry. In Germany, unemployment has already hollowed entire districts. Factories in the Ruhr sit idle. Veterans sell medals on street corners. The Weimar Republic, still young and fragile, is running on borrowed time and borrowed money. Across the Atlantic, the Wall Street crash of October 1929 has drained global credit. American loans that once propped up European economies are recalled. The Dawes Plan, designed to stabilize Germany, collapses under its own weight. Banks stop trusting banks. Nations stop trusting nations. And into that vacuum step men with simple answers. Not economists, not moderates, but voices that promise order, certainty, strength. In Vienna, police are placed on alert. In Berlin, President Paul von Hindenburg's advisors discuss emergency decrees. In Rome, Benito Mussolini watches carefully, already in power, already certain that chaos is democracy's weakness. The strategic balance shifts quietly. When budgets collapse, armies shrink, but so do checks on authority. Parliamentary debate becomes a luxury. Fear accelerates decisions. Then the order changes. Governments begin ruling by decree, not because they want to, but because they believe they must. And once that line is crossed, it is rarely uncrossed. This is the first hinge moment. The collapse of banks does not create dictators overnight, but it strips away resistance. It exhausts populations. It teaches millions that freedom feels fragile and that survival may require obedience. By the end of 1931, Europe is no longer arguing about growth. It is arguing about control. And the people waiting outside, closed doors, are about to be asked a different question entirely. Not about money, but about power. Early morning, Berlin. The bakery opens before sunrise, but the line is already there. Men stand shoulder to shoulder, hands buried in pockets. A woman counts coins twice before stepping forward. The price chalked on the board has changed again. Someone mutters. Someone else leaves the line. No one argues. There is no energy left for that. For millions across Germany, Austria, and much of Central Europe, the financial crisis is no longer abstract. It is measured in loaves of bread, in rent overdue, in children kept home from school. By 1932, entire neighborhoods are surviving on soup kitchens and borrowed coal. What changes here matters because hunger reshapes political choice. When survival becomes uncertain, ideology becomes flexible. The memory of hyperinflation still lingers. Less than a decade earlier, German families pushed wheelbarrows of banknotes to buy a meal. That trauma never faded. So when prices fall, wages collapse, and unemployment deepens, the fear is not just poverty, it is chaos returning. Then the speeches begin to draw crowds. In Berlin's Sportpalast, voices echo off iron beams. Adolf Hitler's message is relentless and simple. Germany is poor because it has been betrayed by bankers, by politicians, by foreign powers. He does not promise wealth, he promises dignity. And the crowd listens. Across the city, the Social Democrats argue for restraint. The Communists demand revolution, but both require patience, sacrifice, complexity. The National Socialists offer something else: certainty, clear enemies, clear solutions. The strategic options narrow. Unemployment benefits are cut as tax revenues vanish. The Brüning government introduces austerity by emergency decree, cutting wages, raising taxes, freezing spending. The intent is stability. The result is despair. Then the vote shifts. In July 1932, the Nazi Party becomes the largest in the Reichstag. Not a majority, but enough. Enough to paralyze parliament. Enough to demand concessions. Enough to look inevitable. In cafes, the talk changes. People no longer ask if the system will fall, only when. Meanwhile, in Austria, Chancellor Engelbert Dollfuss watches Germany carefully. His own economy is shrinking. His coalition is fragile. He begins ruling without parliament, claiming necessity. The logic is familiar. Order first, politics later, everywhere. The same pattern repeats. When bread is scarce, people tolerate measures they once rejected. Police powers expand. Demonstrations are restricted. Newspapers soften their tone or disappear. Then one morning, a bakery does not open at all. The owner has closed. Credit is gone. Suppliers demand cash. Workers are dismissed. Another small silence added to a growing one. By the early 1930s, financial crisis has done more than empty wallets. It has emptied faith in compromise. It has trained populations to accept command over debate. This is not yet war, but the ground beneath democracy is thinning, and those who promise strength are learning exactly how much fear they can spend. Midday, Paris. Inside the Chamber of Deputies, voices rise, then fall into sharp, exhausted silence. Papers are shuffled, calculations are repeated. Outside, traffic moves as usual, but inside, Europe's financial architecture is being argued line by line. Germany still owes reparations from the First World War. France still depends on those payments to service its own war debts to Britain and the United States. The system is circular, brittle, and breaking. What changes here matters because economic pressure becomes moral judgment. And moral judgment, when backed by force, breeds resentment that dictators know how to harvest. In Berlin, the numbers no longer add up. Industrial output has collapsed. Tax revenue is shrinking. Unemployment is rising past levels the Republic has never faced. Yet reparation schedules remain, fixed on paper, indifferent to reality. Then the banks stop lending. American capital, once the lubricant of the entire system, withdraws after 1929. The Young Plan, intended to stabilize long-term payments, becomes politically toxic. To many Germans, it looks like submission. To extremists, it is proof of national humiliation. Hitler's rhetoric sharpens. He does not debate economics. He reframes it as destiny. Germany, he says, is being strangled, and strangulation demands resistance. Across the Rhine, French leaders remember 1914. They remember invasion. They remember devastation. For them, German weakness is not a tragedy. It is security. Any reduction in reparations feels like risk. The strategic stalemate hardens. In June 1931, a brief pause arrives. The Hoover Moratorium. Reparations and war debts are temporarily suspended. For a moment, there is hope. But it is too little, too late. Confidence does not return. Markets do not reopen. Politics does not soften. Then the moment passes. By 1932, cooperation is replaced by suspicion. International conferences end without agreement. Each government retreats inward, protecting its own voters, its own banks, its own power. In Italy, Mussolini uses the paralysis as proof that liberal systems are weak. In Germany, the argument is louder and more dangerous. Democracy has failed because it accepted a rigged international order. The anger settles into something heavier. This is not just about money owed. It is about pride, blame, and memory. About who is punished and who decides. As the crisis drags on, moderate voices lose ground. Compromise looks like surrender. Negotiation looks like weakness. And in the streets, the message is simplified. Germany is poor because others want it that way. Austria is unstable because outsiders interfere. The world is unfair. And only strong states survive. The radio carries these ideas farther each week. Posters repeat them. Marches embody them. The financial system that was meant to prevent another war has instead weaponized grievance. And in that space between debt and dignity, authoritarianism begins to feel not radical, but reasonable. Late afternoon, Berlin. Ballot boxes are sealed under watchful eyes. Polling stations close one by one. Outside, party banners hang limp in the cold air. Inside apartments, families wait by radios, listening for numbers that will decide the future. This is what crisis does to democracy. It turns elections into referendums on fear. By 1932, Germany has voted repeatedly, and each vote has weakened the system it was meant to defend. No party can govern alone. Coalitions collapse before they function. The Reichstag becomes a battlefield without movement. Then, the pattern breaks. The National Socialists surge not because most Germans want dictatorship, but because enough believe no other path. Power no longer flows from consensus. It flows from exhaustion. President Hindenburg appoints chancellors who cannot command majorities. Heinrich Brüning rules through Article 48 emergency decrees. His successor, Franz von Papen, dissolves parliament outright. Each step is legal. Each step erodes the habit of democracy. Then, the calculation is made. Conservative elites, industrialists, landowners, former generals believe they can control Hitler. They see his movement as loud but manageable, a tool to mobilize the masses while they retain authority behind the scenes. On January 30, 1933, Adolf Hitler is appointed chancellor, not by revolution, not by coup, by procedure. The strategic gamble is immediate and irreversible. Within weeks, the Reichstag fire becomes justification. Emergency powers expand. Civil liberties are suspended. Opposition parties are crushed or outlawed. Then, the doors lock. What began as a financial collapse has completed its transformation. Economic fear has become political obedience. The promise of order has overridden the instinct to resist. Elsewhere, leaders take note. In Austria, Dollfuss dissolves parliament in 1933 and begins constructing an authoritarian state. In Spain, economic instability fuels polarization that will soon explode into civil war. Across Eastern Europe, fragile democracies harden into regimes that promise protection over participation. The lesson is learned quickly. When people are afraid enough, legality becomes a formality. Votes become pathways to their own irrelevance. This is not the death of democracy by force. It is death by consent, shaped by years of financial pressure. And once fear has voted, it rarely votes itself out. Nightfall. Berlin. The city is quiet in a way that feels deliberate. Street lights glow through mist. Boots echo on pavement. Inside government buildings, doors close and do not reopen. The language has changed. Orders are no longer debated. They are issued. What changes here matters, because emergency powers, once temporary, become permanent architecture. Financial crisis did not just elevate dictators, it taught states how to function without consent. In Germany, the decree for the protection of people and state suspends freedoms that had defined the republic: assembly, speech, privacy, all paused in the name of stability. The justification is always the same: crisis requires speed, and speed leaves no room for dissent. The economy is still broken. Unemployment remains high. But now, the problem is no longer framed as economic. It is political. Enemies are blamed. Unity is demanded. Sacrifice is enforced. Then the initiative shifts. Rearmament begins quietly, hidden behind public works and employment programs. Autobahn projects are announced. Factories reopen, not to produce consumer goods, but tools of power. Jobs return, and with them, loyalty. Across Europe, leaders are watching closely. In Italy, Mussolini has already normalized rule by decree. The corporate state replaces negotiation with command. In Hungary and Poland, emergency laws concentrate authority in executive hands. Each regime claims necessity. Each uses economic fragility as justification. The pattern is unmistakable. When institutions weaken under financial stress, executives expand. Courts defer. Legislatures shrink. What begins as response becomes habit. Then resistance becomes dangerous. Trade unions are dissolved. Independent banks are absorbed or controlled. The press learns restraint. The state becomes the largest employer and the most powerful creditor. For ordinary people, the change is subtle but total. Wages are paid on time again. Streets feel safer. Chaos recedes, but choice disappears with it. This is the bargain dictatorships offer: predictability instead of participation. And for societies battered by years of crisis, it is tempting. The strategic consequences extend beyond borders. As regimes consolidate internally, they grow bolder externally. Economic recovery tied to militarization creates momentum that demands expansion. The financial crisis has not ended. It has been redirected. By the mid-1930s, Europe is no longer improvising. It is aligning. States organized for command are now competing with those still constrained by debate. The balance of power tilts, not because dictators are stronger, but because democracies are slower. And in the silence of night, the machinery of war begins to turn again. Before dawn, Rome. The city wakes under banners already hanging. No votes are cast today. None are needed. The announcements have been prepared in advance, the language polished to sound inevitable. Order, stability, renewal. Across Europe, authoritarian regimes now speak the same dialect. Each promises protection from chaos. Each claims the crisis has proven democracy obsolete. What changes here matters because silence becomes currency. Compliance is rewarded. Questioning is expensive. In Germany, independent labor organizations are gone. Banks answer to the state. Industrial leaders sign contracts that bind profit to obedience. The economy recovers, not freely, but directionally. Production targets replace market signals, and those who benefit learn quickly not to ask why. Then the press stops asking questions. Newspapers survive by adapting. Headlines sharpen around national strength. Failures are externalized. Successes are amplified. The story becomes consistent, and consistency feels like relief. In Austria, Dollfuss is assassinated in 1934, but the system he built survives him. Power no longer depends on parliament. It depends on force and alignment. In Spain, years of economic strain erupt into civil war, where fear and ideology finally collide openly. The dictators watch and learn. The financial crisis has trained populations to accept hierarchy, to see dissent as danger, to equate unity with survival. This is not mass enthusiasm, it is conditioned restraint. People lower their voices in cafes. Conversations shorten, absence becomes noticeable. When neighbors disappear, explanations are brief and unsatisfying, and rarely challenged. Then, the strategic lock clicks. Once opposition is silenced, policy accelerates. Military spending increases. Borders harden. Alliances shift from shared values to shared enemies. The dictatorships are no longer defensive. They are preparing. Economic recovery tied to state power demands expansion. New markets, new resources, new victories to sustain legitimacy. The crisis that enabled control now requires conquest. For democracies watching from outside, the dilemma is severe. Intervene and risk domestic backlash during economic hardship. Delay and watch authoritarian systems grow more confident, so they delay. By the late 1930s, fear has settled into routine. Dictatorships no longer justify themselves, they simply function. The promise has been paid, not in prosperity, but in silence. And silence, once accepted, becomes very hard to break. Morning light, Europe. Trains run on time, factories hum, flags rise over orderly streets. To an outside observer, stability appears to have returned, but it is a stability built on surrender. This is the final transformation the financial crisis enables. A world willing to trade freedom for predictability, and to accept expansion as the price of control. What changes here matters, because by the time war begins, the outcome is no longer accidental. The economic collapse of the early 1930s has already chosen sides. It has rewarded systems that move fast, suppress dissent, and mobilize fear. Democracies still exist, but they are cautious. Constrained by voters, still haunted by unemployment and loss. Their leaders hesitate. Their publics resist confrontation. Dictatorships do not hesitate. Germany remilitarizes the Rhineland. Italy moves into Ethiopia. Each action tests the limits of resistance. Each success reinforces the lesson learned during the crisis. Decisiveness wins. The strategic window closes quietly. By the late 1930s, the structures are fixed. Emergency powers are permanent. Economies are militarized. Populations are disciplined. When war finally arrives, it does not feel sudden to those inside these systems. It feels like momentum. The financial crisis did not cause World War II on its own, but it prepared the ground. It weakened democracies when they needed patience. It empowered regimes that thrived on urgency. And it taught millions a dangerous lesson, that freedom is negotiable when times are hard. That lesson did not end in 1945. The echoes remain whenever crisis returns, whenever fear asks people to choose between participation and protection. In the years before World War II, the choice was made slowly, quietly, and legally. And once made, it changed the world.